You are now entering a dangerous liberty zone where God-given natural rights are held sacred and exercised. This is your warning. Tyranny, fascism, and censorship will not be tolerated. Ideas will be exchanged freely. Rigorous debate and open discourse is encouraged. If you are weak and your beliefs are fragile, you should leave now. Prepare yourself. We are now live on the Dangerous Liberty Podcast. All right, folks. Happy Tuesday out there, everybody. Hope everybody is having a great day. Lots of you are probably coming off of lunch. If you're over here on the East Coast, getting ready to go to lunch in Central Time and all the rest. So anyways, folks, we got a great show for you today. Make sure that you like, subscribe, all those things I'm supposed to say. Down in the description below, also, there is a link if you'd like to become a member and support this channel. You can become a member that way. It's a couple bucks a month. It goes a long way, and we really do appreciate the support. I want to say hi to everybody over in the chat. I know this is not our normal time, but I appreciate everybody that's showing up. I want to say hi to Summer, Karma Cassie, obscure YouTuber, or obscure moderator. I'm the obscure YouTuber. Kier Dilla, Okie Angel, and many JP6 Gunner, Tammy McDonald. Always love to see Tammy and JP over in the chat. They're always there. Texas Motherbird, Cloudy PDX, and many more. Folks, thank you for tuning in. Again, make sure you like, and most importantly, this is what I want you to do. If you want to support this channel, you want to support our message, we want to out-message all the other people out there lying to you. The way that we do this is you share this content. That is the best thing, the biggest thing that you can do for us. Get the word out there and help us spread the message. That's what it's really about. If you missed last night's show, and you haven't shared last night's show, that is a message that needs to get out as well. Our podcast that we did with Nate Vance talking about ballistics. That's one of the most predominant, nonsensical, dumbest theories out there, that 30-06 is impossible to not have an exit wound. We went over that in depth. It was a very fun, very interesting podcast. So make sure you share that as well. Make sure you watch it as well so that you're armed with facts and not these people out there shooting pieces of beef out in the backyard telling you what did or did not happen with Charlie Kirk. But without further ado, I want to go ahead and welcome on Lisa Logan. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been following you for a long time. I've always enjoyed your common sense and your approach to all the topics of current events and politics. And man, I just appreciate you coming on the show. And if you will, take a moment and just tell everybody about who you are. And I'm always interested in the origin story. Like, what made you crazy enough to get into the social media space?
Right. Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show, Gary. Thanks so much for having me. And my story actually is a pretty interesting one. Like many people, I got woken up during the pandemic. I started going to school board meetings and saying, hey, why are we implementing certain policies? I'm not seeing the science line up here. And just happened to be there when there was a presentation given by one of the administrators there about a program they were bringing into the schools, particularly my child's school, that was new. It was called social emotional learning. And they started talking about, oh, we're going to be teaching your kids values and things like that. And I was like, wait a minute, I think that's my lane as a parent to teach my kid values. And it became very clear as I started looking into this program that they were using it to brainwash children to get them to adopt critical theories like critical race theory, critical queer theory, get them to adopt a lot of these collectivist mindsets. So it kind of started my journey as a researcher down that rabbit hole. And if you know about anything about the institutions, they all connect. So that led me to figure out how they're doing it in business and figuring out how they're doing it in government. And it's led me to this kind of wider array of kind of exposing a lot of these psychological operations and narrative forming that they have going on in the public. So that's kind of how I got my start.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you're a mom, you're just concerned about the world out there and you got involved in this. And I think a lot of people's eyes were open. I know mine was. Like, I think there was also a sense of urgency that was created in the pandemic. We saw what they were obviously doing and just propagandizing so many people. And then, you had people running around with masks on nonstop and in their cars, and then coming up to you in grocery stores, yelling at you, telling them to put your mask on. I realized, like, before the pandemic, I was like, how did, those in Germany, the same people in Germany become so brainwashed, that they fell in line with Nazism, right? And how were they convinced that, like, we need to kill Jews, we need to dominate the world, we have this idea of a superior race, and like I realized right then, like how easy people are to be manipulated and what was happening. And you're right, I definitely started talking more vocally about politics. That's about the time that I started doing our Wednesday, around 2020, 2021, something like that. We started doing a Wednesday podcast talking about politics and current events and things like that. And it was, again, it was just like, these people were talking about science, and it's like, look, I looked up all the studies on masks. They don't do anything when it comes to, especially viruses. It's like putting up a picket fence to keep out the mice. It doesn't make sense. But you're going to force. And then, by the way, it's not even like, I was traveling a lot during that time. It was okay if you just had like something on your face. It's like these around that you buy like 10 for $1 that you can see through them, and they're like, oh yeah,
ridiculous.
You have to walk to your table in a restaurant with your mask on, but as soon as you sit down, you're fine.
You magically have a bubble around you that protects you, right?
Yes. I mean, we look back and laugh now, but I hope people in the future play clips from the pandemic and like, look how idiotic these people were. And we actually analyzed, like, look, this was a psychological operation that was put upon the American people, and so many people fell for it. And it should be a warning to future generations. And it should be a warning to us now, for sure, because I do think now we see less psychological operations, and they never end from the government. But we see less psychological operations coming from the government, and they've shifted focus, and now it's coming from the private sector, especially social media, and it's clearly boosted by so many other of our foreign adversaries as well as political adversaries. I kind of got dragged into this thing with Candace Owens back in December. I was just kind of covering the Charlie Kirk assassination. I went to UVU. I wanted to confirm or deny if the story that we were being given was truthful. And then I saw what Candace Owens was doing, and I immediately recognized it for a information operation and a disinformation operation. And then we saw all these other things that are continually being tied into it. And now it kind of culminates for me in her going to Russia, attending the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and understanding what that is, and understanding what BRICS is, and it's their goal behind BRICS and how that affects the United States. I think a lot of people are missing. They just don't understand that. There's a clear concerted effort here in the United States to trick a lot of Americans. What's your take on all of that?
It's been going on for a long time, like you said, Gary. I mean, you brought up World War II. I actually watched a really interesting documentary the other day that brought up the fact that Hitler actually sent his generals to go study what Edward Bernays was doing in America to get, for instance, women to start smoking through these influence campaigns. And it was very crafty. They use narrative, they use words that people associated with freedom and liberty. He actually told a really interesting story about the women who were the suffragists walking through. They were in a protest line, and they had cigarettes hidden underneath their skirts, and they called them. They all at the same time lit up and called them torches of liberty. And they brought that methodology, right, to create a narrative to inspire people, kind of tie it to things that they care about, and they brought it back to Germany, and I believe that's how they got people to kind of get on with Hitler's ideology, and blaming a whole race of people for their problems, and we see this continue even today. And it's interesting, the reason my alarm bells went off with social emotional learning, and I can continue to see the psychological operations happening today in the social media, is because I actually myself belonged to a cult for 7 years, from about the time I was about 16 to 23. And I recognized immediately the type of methodologies that were being used that quickly get people to adhere to an ideology. So a lot of that has to do with creating a sense of belonging. There's a reason why they call them the Manson family, right? They literally take people away from their families and say, now we're your family. Now you belong here. And they do the same thing with kids in social emotional learning, is they present ideologies that very much butt up against the ideologies that their family teaches them from the time that they're very little. And this is very traumatizing. Cults also use trauma. And that's why I think, I think a lot of people aren't wrong that they see a lot of Jewish people propagating a lot of this stuff. They were one of the first groups manipulated, actually. They were traumatized from the Holocaust. They ended up inserting a lot of these collectivist ideologies into the yeshiva schools and things. So they're not completely wrong, but I think blaming an entire race on a few people being brainwashed is a terrible idea. And right now what we see is that they are creating division. They're specifically using these psychological operations, especially to create division on the right. There has been infiltration, I believe, by people on the left who are pretending to be conservatives, that are drawing people away from this idea of freedom and liberty, getting them to for instance, oppose data centers, which most conservatives would be like, no, I don't want data centers in my backyard. But they're muddying the water, right, by having some people support them. Same with the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I love that you are kind of butting up against the false narratives that have happened. I actually live in Utah. It was interesting. I was on a space with laissez-faire over the weekend, and many people who don't live in Utah do not understand the culture here, do not understand that campus. I'm glad you visited, so you can kind of see, when people start saying, well, why are so many people saying, where did the gunfire come from? Well, it's an amphitheater. It echoes people. And there's a reason why. They don't understand how confusing that campus is. There's so many different factors that I think people, because they don't have like a firsthand view of it all, create other crazy narratives. And early on, when I started connecting with SK33, who you've had on your show, and Data Republican, trying to tell them like, hey, the second that assassination happened, I had a feeling I kind of knew who might be behind it, or maybe who put Tyler up to it if he is in fact the shooter. And I started handing that information to people who I knew were in direct contact with Candace, and not just in her tips line either. And it's interesting to me that she's followed this entire narrative of the Jews and Erica and all these other things, when there are very many other relevant theories that actually have real data and real motive behind them.
And at least some evidence. And she's
Right.
avoided those and distracted from those every single time. It's not just hey, I'm not following through this at all. Like, she has intentionally obfuscated against those, which that was one of my biggest, like, what she's doing right now is not in good faith. Because again, when I first heard of what Candace was doing, this was like mid-November, because I wasn't paying attention at all. I still really had only followed her, like I had positive viewpoint of her, and I knew her from like the TPUSA days, the Daily Wire days. I hadn't been following her since she had went on her own at all. As a matter of fact, the last piece of content I'd seen of hers, because I always watched Tucker Carlson back then, was when she went on Tucker Carlson and was talking about the Macron lawsuit. And I was like, get them. Like, oh yeah, these people, how dare they? Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, she wants them to sue her so that she can get discovery. Yeah, all right, these people are going down. That was the last I had seen of her. And then I'd seen a post. It was from Natalie Beisner. And I told Natalie, and I was like, oh, Natalie's going after Candace? That's weird. And then I was like, there's no way this true. I literally thought, like, I really like Natalie, but she's going after Candace unreasonably just for like clout or something, right? She's jealous of her, whatever. And then I went and watched the episode. I just sat there with my jaw on the floor, like, and I recognize the methodologies, the tactics that she was using to make the most illogical thing appear logical. And I was like, wow. And then I started going back through her other episodes and seeing what was taking place, and it was so strategic, so methodical. and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and it made me extremely concerned that so many people were buying into what was completely unbelievable.
Yeah, me too. It was actually really shocking. People who I thought had a lot of common sense were all of a sudden spouting her theories and watching her every day. Like a lot of the moms who actually helped me get the social emotional learning program out of our school district that was so terrible, were telling me like, oh, I've been watching Candace every day and giving her tips. And I think, again, like we're talking about belonging and creating like a family type atmosphere. It's like by telling her viewers like, hey, give me tips and you're my mommy squad and all these different things, they like, mothers whose lives are pretty, humdrum every day, making her kids lunches or doing laundry or whatever. There is an intrigue, right, to get involved with an investigation like this. And she created this atmosphere of belonging for mothers to, it's like, I think that's why a lot of mothers too are into like true crime kind of stuff. I mean, and I was even, before I was doing a lot of research, I mean, I've read a 1,000-page book about JFK, and I was really interested in the O.J. Simpson trial, to the fact where like it literally drove from his mansion to Nicole Brown Simpson's house to see how long it might have taken him, to get there and back, like that's how, like, but there's this intrigue and this interest in doing something beyond the mundane. And I think that she's created that, but in creating that, she's also sucked a lot of people in who normally would have a lot of discernment in regards to her theories and be able to say, man, I don't know if I think that that's the truth.
Yeah, no, you talk about trauma too. It's like the thing that I identified is that the Biden administration and COVID primed especially the conservative side of the aisle for this, that they prepped them for this. Like we got to a point to where we rejected anything by default what the government said, and we had, I was like, man, if we don't get Biden out of office and we, Kamala Harris wins, like this is the end of our republic. And then we get Trump in there, and it's not long after Trump gets in there and people start saying, well, why, it's like 2 months in, why haven't there been arrests? Why haven't the Epstein files? Why is this going on? And I saw like this narrative building, and I was like, this will fade. Things will, like, people know that government rolls slowly, but it continued to build. And then it turned into like we were treating the Trump administration as if they were the Biden administration. We were treating the Trump administration as if it was the same FBI that was led by Ray and James Comey and was responsible for January 6th. We were treating Trump as if it was the same administration that never released the Epstein files at all and sat on them for over 4 years. We were treating them as if like we were the Trump administration was the ones that telling you that, you have to get vaccinated or you can't go to work or your kids can't go to school, or like all of the things that were perpetrated on the American people by the Biden administration, most importantly by the left. I'm not even sure that Biden knew what was going on most of the time, but it was perpetrated by the left. And now it became the sons of Donald Trump. And like we're treating these things equal. And I don't think we should ever trust the government. And I think we should always have accountability and as much transparency as possible so that and that was really my intent behind the Charlie Kirk assassination. I was willing to believe anything that was supported by facts or evidence. And I went there and they released the charging documents. I went through all of that. I was like, this makes sense. I'm not believing it yet. And then there was a lot of questions that I had left to be answered. And honestly, a lot of that was answered at UVU. Between seeing that space, I'm assuming you've been there?
Yes.
It's like such a smaller space than it looks like on television, and like one of the things I was like, well, there could have been a shooter over at the bush, by the bush. My dog is attacking the mailman, I think. Poor mailman.
It happens.
He's riled up.
Real life people. We have dogs. We have people walk in. It's just real life.
He's a Cane Corso, so once he gets going, he's ready to go. But I was like, there was a couple of these theories that still sounded plausible to me, and that was like do you remember they were saying like the Bushman theory, like on that little landing?
I did see that they were dressed like bushes. They were inside, yeah.
Just on the landing on the Fugel building. And then I get there and I look up at where that is, and it's like I could throw a baseball to it, and it's like in such physical, like that's impossible, like it's such a smaller space than it looks. And then the other thing was I still had questions about how to get on the roof, and I was hearing all these people down in the comments saying, yeah, you got to have a special key card. I talked to a bunch of UVU faculty members, and they said there's no way to get on the roof, that had to be planned. And then I walk up a set of stairs and I look at the roof on the top of the walkway. I'm like, he just stepped over the rail. Like, this is crazy. And then the one that really got me, do you remember everyone was saying that the video of Tyler Robinson jumping off the roof, in the background you can see this guy disappear behind a tree, and they were like, look, it's AI. And I ended up recreating that. I was like, oh, it's between the angle of the camera, it's just this crazy optical illusion, because between the angle of the camera where a couple of trees are placed, and then the pathway just goes to the right and goes downhill right away. It's just a crazy coincidence, but
Right.
That's what it was. But I saw immediately that there were all these people inserting so much confusion intentionally between, we were immediately bombarded with like the palm gun, camera guns, tunnels, the French Foreign Legion, people in maroon shirts. I don't even know where we're at in all this anymore, to be honest with you. I don't know what the other narrative is at this point. But the point here is like, we saw this gish galloping right off the bat. We saw confusion inserted in this right off the bat. And then we saw this intentional, incremental indoctrination that was taking place with Candace, among others. And that's what we're seeing in America, going even back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That's what the Soviet Union has planned and implemented communism. And, just the other day, I read the 45 communist goals that Congress actually read in 1963. And it is crazy to go through those and see how many of those have been implemented, and then see how many of those goals that were referencing newspapers and like TV news and things like that now just translate perfectly into social media, maybe even easier.
Right. And actually, I think your audience will appreciate this, because I have a lot of military guys. This goes all the way back to the OSS and the Tavistock Institute. And there's a lot of German social psychologists who came out of there that came up with this methodology of brainwashing people into a particular narrative. And, they used to do it to actual spies that they would be dropping out into the field, because they wanted to kind of trauma bond them together, so that if they were out in the field and they got captured, say, they wouldn't, defect, or they wouldn't, squeal on their friends and where they were. And so a lot of that happened early on with all of that. And there was a guy who was actually doing that there called Kurt Lewin, and he actually came to America and started something called the National Training Laboratories. And they basically like curated this methodology of what they called unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And this methodology, so first imagine an ice cube, right? You're solid in your shape. When you unfreeze, okay, and you're breaking down someone's identity, you then become water. Now you can fit any container that you're put in. And if you refreeze that water in a different container, you completely reshape who they are. And so Kurt Lewin started this National Training Laboratory. It was put together by the Office of Naval Research and the NEA, of all places, the National Education Association. And you've seen this, and you ask why? Why would they do that? Why would they put it in education? Why would they put it in advertising? Why would they put it in business? Why would they put it in all these things? And it's really because the communists, like you're saying, for years, they've been playing this very long game in order to get people to become collectivist. And they're raised in a system that's American, right? They're raised in American families. The West thinking permeates through culture, our institutions. They had to take over every single institution, our media, our families, our governments, our business. They've infiltrated how managers are trained, and it's all to get people to, and like I said, they have a different methodology. They get people in these groups, and they get them to share very vulnerable things about each other, right? So you may be sharing I'll give you an example. Abigail Shrier actually wrote a really great book called Bad Therapy, and she covered social emotional learning in that book and interviewed me. And I told her the story of this parent whose kid was in 5th grade, and they asked like an icebreaker question. They get in these small groups, and this is part of social emotional learning, and they ask them something very open, like, what makes you sad? And this, kids are sharing varying things, right? My dog bit me, my cat passed away, my fish died, my grandmother died. This one kid completely opens up. It creates a vulnerability spiral. And he said, my parents are getting divorced, and now my mom is drinking and seeing other people. And one by one, these kids in the group next to this girl that's telling the story to her mom, they share deeper and deeper, more terrible things about what's going on in their lives. And by the time they end this circle time, all the kids are crying and they're traumatized. And, SEL can happen in any type of setting. So, they can do that. In this case, they were in math class because they've infiltrated every single academic subject with this stuff. And the math teacher didn't know how to put this child's shattered, identity back together as they're crying and emotional and upset. And, she tried saying something like, I'm really sorry you're going through this. Now class, let's take out our math books, because we've got a test next week. And so these kids end up upended. But what this happens is when you upend kids, again, this is breaking down their identity. And this happened in managerial training. This happened in training federal employees through something called the Partnership for Public Service. They literally, and like I said, this all started in the UK. And they brought it here to America to the point where people were getting together and doing this at like retreats and stuff, right? Like they were encounter sessions. And Congress actually in 1969 had a hearing, and they said, we cannot do this sensitivity training stuff anymore. It's called T group sensitivity training. It has lots of different names, but it's all the same methodology. And what did they do? They changed it, and then they put it back in schools, and then they put it in manager training, and they did all these things. So this methodology has been known for a long time. And this has unfortunately been used by the government to, in MK Ultra and in other things. And it's crazy because there was a CIA memo that I found from 1974, I think it was. And it was the CIA chief psychologist saying, we don't want this sensitivity training that everyone's involved in right now in the 70s to be used by the CIA, because he likened it to brainwashing that was in China and said it basically strips people of their individual judgment. And so I think this is what I want your audience to think about when they talk about these psychological operations. This is, again, 1940, right after the bomb dropped, we created the United Nations. It was to create this, all is one worldview. And this is basically what they've been trying to get into society for us to have a collectivist one world government for a very long time. And America and the West is an impedance to that. And so they have to infiltrate the West. They have to do this stuff where they're elevating Brick Scary, and they're pushing the Western ideology out, because the West is the only nations, right, that believe that your rights come from God and that they are protected by our Constitution. And the people that we elect, their whole job is to make sure that our rights aren't infringed by any laws that they put into place. And the Eastern countries, the Eastern Bloc, is very much about an Eastern spirituality. It's very much about oneness. It's about collectivism. And so they have to destroy the West. And this is really what this whole color revolution you're seeing happen right now is about. It's about silencing dissenting voices. It's about destroying individuality and freedom. And eventually, as they put into place these systems across time, right? The United Nations, they put it into education. They used advertising, radio, TV. Now we have social media, right? And even, with Epstein, what I found interesting was that a lot of the girls who were victims were talking about bioengineering experiments that were being performed on them at Zora Ranch. I wonder, are they trying to figure out how to do away with our selfish gene per se, right? Like, how do we get people to experience this oneness? They even inserted drugs into the culture. That's what the CIA did during Woodstock, to try to get people to adhere to this oneness mindset. And so slowly by slowly, you see how it's been put into our culture so that we capitulate. And the last and final step, if they can't get everybody in the West to adopt this oneness mindset, is a social credit score and social control through, you won't be able to opt out of it, right? Digital ID, all the things that we talk about that is coming with these AI data centers, and it's coming with this integration of all the systems into interoperable data. So I'm just saying that this color revolution is more than just stopping Donald Trump and implementing a new economy and a new governance system. It's about fundamentally changing America to a collectivist country.
Well, do me a favor, and for the viewers out there, color revolution gets thrown around a lot. I see it in many different terms. I understand the definition, but define color revolution for the viewers out there so they know exactly what we're talking about.
Right, and I want to plug my friend Data Republican's book Unelected. She's talks all about color revolutions in that book, and it was really amazing because SK and I were able to work with her and give her our research to write some of her final chapters, basically talking about the color revolution going in America. So she goes on, like, basically for a long time, our government has been, our intelligence agencies have been going into other countries and quote unquote spreading democracy. And a lot of times in order to do that, they have to upend the current government because it's a fascist government, it's a dictatorship or whatever it is. They have to do a regime change per se, right? And a lot of times they use various kind of connected organizations on the ground to train people to create narratives, just like we're talking about here, right? It's all the different things to basically create enough pressure on the current government to get that leader to step down and to install a new leader that will supposedly push this idea of Western democracy. But as we've seen and as we've reported, we now have former USAID members who are not supposed to operate on our soil, so U.S. international aid, and they use that money to do these color revolutions. They're now using it to do a color revolution here in the U.S. They believe Trump is a fascist dictator. He's an authoritarian, and basically since he was elected in 2016, it set into motion this machine that was literally going to shift America. And they've done it through a lot of these interconnected organizations and NGOs that we've all been exposing, and through particular organizations that are putting out these recommendations to completely change the way we do governance in our country.
Yeah, and just to open people's eyes, let's talk about some examples of what you think is tied directly to the color revolution. And what I look back and see is, number one, the open borders policy of the Biden administration and how they were intentionally and using NGOs and former USAID members and things like that, and people that are attached to USAID and ultimately even different government agencies, ushering these people in, telling them how to work the system. And then we go into the George Floyd riots, we go into all of these things. And you said, there's all these people that believe that Donald Trump is a fascist and a racist. Do you think they believe that, or that's the narrative that they want to convince people of, capitalizing and exploiting people's grievances and that's essentially what communism has always done. But besides some of the examples that I give, what are some other real world examples that you can look back on, like, hey, that was an op, that was intentional to undermine, the U.S. government so that we can install something else?
Well, I would say Charlottesville. I think that's come out in the news recently. We know for sure that the SPLC was actually funding a lot of the people on the ground who made Charlottesville the white supremacy crisis that it was. And they actually, when you think about the SPLC and what's come out recently about how they've been funding these radical white supremacist groups, right, while saying, hey, look at these white supremacists and they're going to wreck our country, that's been 100% intentional. And And again, how often did they use that clip of Trump that was like, there's good people on both sides? It's like not what he meant, right?
Yeah.
But
He
they
clarifies later on, but they don't ever say that. He said specifically, I'm not talking about the white supremacists.
Right. Yeah. And if you listen to the whole clip, that becomes, and I actually think there's a lot of liberals who eventually did listen to that clip, and that's how they ended up becoming at least centrist, because they're like, wait a second, like the media is purposely lying to me. And if you think about like, again, we're not supposed to be having our own intelligence operate on our soil to do these kinds of things, but they've been doing it for a long time. And Obama put into place a whole like psychological operations unit within his administration to be able to push narratives on the public, whether that be for public health or other reasons. And I think that's what people keep saying, restore the Smith-Mundt Act. You know what I mean? Like we need to make sure that our government isn't doing psychological operations on us to try to manipulate the public. But I for sure Charlottesville, and I do think this Charlie Kirk assassination obviously is a huge example that we can point to right at the current time. And that's why, right after he was assassinated, I was watching these particular groups, and immediately I wrote an article and went on InfoWars to talk about the fact that less than 24 hours later, there were 7 organizations that included Mormon Women for Ethical Government, which is not a good name for that group because none of that's true. And others like Braver Angels, like the Dignity Index folks, that was actually part of the Biden administration. We can talk about that in a little bit if you want. They all got together and had a website within 24 hours created called turntoward.us. And they were pushing particular initiatives that would silence free speech, that would take away people's First Amendment rights, that would do things like score your speech on a contempt scale from 1 to 8, and be able to, they say it's because, contempt is the, biggest, threat to free speech because that's what people are afraid of. And it's like, actually, no, that's actually not right. And they do that so that they can eventually silence voices that they don't agree with. And I saw right away that Charlie Kirk's assassination was being used to push particular things that I knew had come out of the Biden administration and the United We Stand Summit.
Why do you think that they decided to capital? And we could go down a rabbit hole to where, we can build onto a larger conspiracy that ultimately Tyler Robinson may have been radicalized and weaponized and directed toward a target. I don't know if that's true. We don't have any evidence of that so far. I think that should be explored. Hopefully that is being explored. But let's say that's not what happened. We have Tyler Robinson allegedly go up there, kill Charlie Kirk because he was convinced that Charlie Kirk was hateful and that his stance on trans and LGBTQ activism was damaging to this country. Mm-hmm. Why do you think they saw that as such an opportunity to come in and kind of fill the vacuum that Charlie left? Like what was so beneficial to him once he was killed?
Well, I think first of all, he was somebody who really brought in the youth to vote for Trump. First of all, that makes him a threat, period. When you're looking at, one of the 3 goals of the color revolution is to stop Donald Trump, and really to stop populism. That was a big contributing factor, right? I also do know, so one of the things that we've exposed as part of the color revolution is that the left and the right are working together. People who normally donate to what we consider conservative causes, like the Koch Institute. There used to be 2 brothers, but one of them died. Now it's just Charles Koch. But that institute's rebranded to Stand Together, and they've been working with organizations on the left, like the Soros organizations. And they actually got together right after Trump was elected the first time. in 2017, I had Jenica put out this video that I had found where Mark Gerzen, who's head of the Mediators Foundation, where a lot of these NGOs camp to look like they have got more backing as 501c4s and things. But he's the head of the Mediators Foundation. Actually, his wife was instrumental in putting social emotional learning in schools, along with Tim Shriver, who's the head of the Dignity Index. So he was speaking at this library, and he basically said, I'm organizing this meeting later this year. This is in 2017, because I'm pretty sure that the Kochs aren't happy with Donald Trump, and Soros isn't happy with what's happening on the left. And hopefully we can get them together for a discussion. I guess 20 other funders were also coming, and we can get them together to basically collaborate to get what they want. And so that's what I'm saying. When you see a lot of things happening right now that are confusing, you're like, why is this supposedly conservative organization supporting particular things? It's because they're working together. And so part of that meeting, and that happened at the Pocentino Conference Center, and what came out of that was the creation of a group called the New Pluralists. Now, the New Pluralists gave $1 billion to that United We Stand Summit and its initiatives. So it's interesting if you think about it, everything that then came forward from that, and that was organized by the SPLC and Susan Rice, was to target particular groups that they considered domestic terrorists that were creating hate-fueled violence in the community. And I believe, because it's very much connected, that and Senator Grassley came out and talked about this right shortly after Charlie's death, actually, that there was this thing called Arctic Frost, and they had particular organizations on a list as domestic terrorists, and TPUSA was one of them. Mm-hmm. I also found a Chronicle of Philanthropy article that they were talking about the New Pluralists and how they were trying to get money from a lot of these organizations, but these organizations were not wanting to participate in this, kind of multi-faith pluralistic idea of getting, Christian nationalists and, Christians together. They were supporting monolithic faith objectives like TPUSA, and they literally named TPUSA as a reason why they weren't getting these kinds of funding. And so I see that, Turning Point USA was so effective that their pluralist initiatives they were trying to put into place were actually not working. And the reason they want to get these groups together, and you see a lot of bridging movements involved in the color revolution. There's actually 4 Bs. I think SK's mentioned them on your show. There's the blocking groups, there's the bridging groups, there's the building groups, and then there's the belonging groups. And a lot of, there's kind of like a Venn diagram, and they kind of all intersect, but the bridging groups especially, and social emotional learning, again, works the same way. We're talking about this whole idea of brainwashing people, right, and getting them to adopt particular mindsets. These are all, when they talk about getting reds and blues together like braver angels, these are facilitated meetings. Rosa Quare actually did a really good job exposing this when she was talking about how they were getting Agenda 21 into local communities. They would have these strategic planning sessions, and the groups would get together and they put all these, I'm sure many of your viewers have probably participated in these dumb kinds of things. Sometimes they call them listening sessions. They put all these sticky notes on the wall. Everybody feels like they have their say, but really the facilitator is using group dynamics and crowd agitator techniques, to, kind of push away dissenting voices and kind of steer the narrative of the group to a consensus that is part of a desired outcome they were already, they already knew that they wanted at the end of it, right? So this is how a lot of communities ended up implementing Agenda 21 policies in their communities. And it's how they're getting a lot of reds and blues together to push public policy further and further to the left. It is a very manipulative technique called Delphi, and they've been using it a very, very long time. So all of these groups are working together to undermine the populist movement and to basically create a new, like I said, system of governance, new way of electing people, kind of more of like a participatory democracy, ranked choice voting, citizen assemblies type of deal that has some elements of democracy, but a lot of elements of socialism. And
And we saw a perfect example of, even with Candace doing this
Mhm.
right? We have her having, all of a sudden she has Hunter Biden on, who she has
Mhm.
called a pedophile. She's called human trafficker, a crackhead, amongst others, and accused him. And I agree with these statements that he was selling influence. I think that Hunter Biden is the most corrupt son of a president that happens to be the son of the most corrupt president that we may have ever had. So she has him
Mhm.
on and just glazes him. Just, this is a
Mhm.
promotion tour. And then not long after that, she has Anna Kasparian on. And this is
Mm.
exactly what we're seeing. It's like she's already making her way. And I talked about this last night, how strategic this is, where she's kind of distancing herself from the right and going for more of, bringing in a leftist population to where
Mhm.
she can continue to manipulate, because there's a lot of people on the left that still consider her this weird conservative person, even though she hasn't been that for a while. But this is signaling to them, like, no, 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 no. We're all in this together, and we're against
Mhm.
Trump. And ultimately the MAGA movement overall. And even going back to what you were saying about Charlie Kirk, like, a lot of people don't realize, like, Charlie Kirk is attributed with 2.5 million votes. We beat Kamala
Mhm.
Harris by 2.3 million votes. Like, not only was he such an effective speaker and so compelling, and being able to talk about things from a conservative standpoint that just wasn't spiritual and biblical, but also reason and logic, right? That he
Mhm.
was able to bridge that gap. And like you said,
Right.
suddenly with Charlie Kirk, it was cool to be conservative on a college campus again. It was cool to be,
Mhm.
like, he made those things popular, feeding into, the populism idea, and making these things that were once laughed at mainstream. But I see the left and the right coming together in a way that I've attempting to, like, these it's the horseshoe theory turned into this oval.
Mhm.
We've all talked about this. It's almost cliche at this point, but it's just so obvious. And if you open your eyes and you know what's going on, and you understand how these manipulation tactics that you're talking about, it's like, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is. And
Mhm.
people need to, because, like I said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I'm glad, you, SK Double Dub, and Data Republican, so many people out there are opening people's eyes. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to, like, that was such a clear example of this bridging that's taking place as well.
Right. And I think a lot of people are falling for it. I mean, and granted they're going to, right? I think we've had years of so much division, where, I mean, it used to be that you could talk about politics in public with your friends, or even it wasn't like you're my enemy. It's like, oh well, ideologically we don't agree, but let's have lunch anyway, kind of thing. Like, and now it's become like, if you don't adhere to my ideology, you are literally, it's like, that's exactly what you're talking about with COVID, right? You're going to kill grandma if you don't wear the mask. I think JP Sears actually did a really funny thing one time. It's like, if you don't wear your life jacket, like I'm going to drown. Like, so but it's this idea of, you must comply ideologically with me, or you are literally going to kill. Like, there's this hyperbolic nature of, like, you're going to kill the country, and you're going to kill me, and you're going to kill, like, it's to the point where you're dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Your ideas are dangerous. You as a person are dangerous. And I think this is, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of this come up through COVID and otherwise. And, families can't sit down and have Thanksgiving dinner anymore, because you can't even sit at the same table with someone who thinks differently than you do politically. And I think that's sad that we've gotten to that place, and we got to find our way back. But obviously, the Marxists and the communists, they always have the whole, create the problem, then you create the solution that's going to solve that problem. And this is really what they've done. They've created the division, they've created this narrative of us versus them, and then they're going to come in with the solution that's going to actually water down beliefs on actually probably both sides. But most is going to lead, that Overton window is going to shift to the left, and the leftist ideology, and we're going to try to do synergy and kumbaya and all that kind of stuff. But what happens is if people can't stand firm in their beliefs, um, then why believe anything? at that point. If you're going to water down what you believe to comply with someone else's, like you literally lose yourself. And that's exactly what they want. They want people to say, wow, if I believe this, if I believe that a man cannot become a woman, and sex, like we can literally change sex hormones, and have someone completely change their sex. You're bigoted, and they use, and that's the other thing I want to mention as a part of this manipulation. And actually GADSAD just came out with a book called Toxic Empathy. And I've talked a lot about how, would you say?
Suicidal empathy.
Suicidal, say, thank you. I call it toxic empathy, but yes, I project that onto his book. Yeah, suicidal empathy, toxic empathy, and this is literally what they use to manipulate children in social emotional learning and in these what I call these type of Delphi technique discussions. They use empathy as a weapon. It's not enough to, like we're just saying, like you can have different beliefs than I do. In one of the social emotional learning lessons, they had a boy dressed as a girl wearing full makeup, and called himself Riley, and he was saying, I feel like everybody kept saying, why is that boy wearing a skirt, and I felt that it was so mean that everybody kept asking that question. It's like, well, kids are curious, it doesn't conform to gender norms, but then it's not enough to be nice to someone like Riley and to say, listen, obviously that kid's going through a lot, I don't know what his life is like, right? And it's enough to say, hey, you can do your thing over there. And that's always been the American way. Like, hey, we can disagree. And this is a melting pot of ideas and a melting pot of cultures. But you and I can live our lives as long as we live under the Constitution. Now it's not enough to do that. You have to become an activist. You have to become an ally. You have to completely subvert the way that you feel and that you're raised to be empathetic towards that person means you have to completely give up who you are. And I think that's the problem with a lot of these techniques is that's the methods that they use to get people to adopt particular ideologies.
Yeah, no, I mean, they hit it from all angles, right? They use an emotional appeal to make you accept things that aren't real or logical. And then they will attempt to use these fallacious arguments to accept things that are not illogical. Not logical. And you see this all the time. Like a good example of this, well, at least an example, I don't know how good it is, but have you ever watched these flat earthers, like a flat earth YouTube channel or something like that? They will come up with a lot of things that if you don't research that deeper, it's like, oh yeah, I understand how people are sucked into this. They will go to great lengths to create these false narratives and pick and choose information and facts and be like, look, this proves my point, while they're omitting so much else. So I get how people fall into this, but ultimately it's like, what's the answer and how do we stop this stuff? And I also want to point out to everybody where we see the rise of the color revolution really is with Donald Trump himself. And he has been the target of this, the MAGA movement. Donald Trump has been the target of both the left and the right, which, like you said, they're two sides of the same coin. Because ultimately, like even with what's going on, I've talked about this so much because it's important for people to understand. It's like what we see with this woke right and the far left is the far left has always pushed collectivism, globalism, ultimately communism, socialism.
Right.
But now the far right is doing the exact same thing. They're just repackaging this globalism for the right. That's what's happening. And Donald Trump has been a threat to both sides of that coin since he's come into office. Why do you think? Why is that? Like, what is Donald Trump doing that is such a threat to the globalists and the communists out there?
I think their biggest thing, and like you said, the immigration agenda. I think that's been his assertion to stop this whole flood of immigrants into our country. It's because it's really a part of their larger plan, which the socialists have been talking a long time in their socialist conferences. They literally have these socialist scholar conferences. Actually, Obama was a part of those in the early 80s. And there was two people that came out of that, the Cloward and Piven strategy of overwhelming the social services to break the system. And I think that's what they were trying to do through the Biden administration. Trump's policies against immigration and his whole assertion of America first really does break down the international order of how things are supposed to work. And like you've said, they've been playing a really long game. And eventually this is their goal of having America capitulate to the other countries and kind of taking it down as a world power. Trump is accelerating America being a world power and America being America first, and not dragging us into agreements that weaken our country and weaken our strength in the global sphere. And so I think that's one of the major things. And because he has so much money, he really can't be bought. You know, he originally started as someone who was just a businessman who was asking lots of questions. You know, if you look at really some of his older interviews, people were always pressuring him to run for president because he was like, listen, no matter who's in office, I'm going to tell him, like you just said, like we should not be able to be afraid whether they have an R or a D behind their name to be critical of our leaders and hold them accountable. And he's a real threat to them in that regard. He has swelled a populist movement within our country who is now beginning to see that there are a lot of bureaucratic structures put into place that take away our voice. And, you know, whether that be the public-private partnerships that we see happening all over the place, you know, big business, you know, in a lot of ways, he's actually, and I would be critical of Trump in that way, not being firm enough in taking a lot of those out, right? But he has been saying, hey, listen, we got to do things that benefit America and America first. So we're not going to be dragged into a forever war. We're not going to create a trade agreement where, you know, we end up finishing last, or be involved in something like UNESCO where we give the bulk of the money and they're dictating our, you know, our opinions on the world stage. So he's been a threat to them in that regard.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because there's this whole group of people right now on the woke right. If you look at their bio, there's two things you always see, and that is Christ is King and America first. And when you start looking at their policies and what they actually believe and what they're pushing for, it is one of the most destructive things that could possibly happen to America. You want to see America fall on the world stage, follow their policies. And one of those things, the United States has engaged in an overabundance of interventionism in the last 20 or so years. I'll be the first to say that. And because we're so concerned about interventionism, now we have this big push for isolationism. And that's what they want. And they want to convince people, hey, the world, like, we will be safer. America is safer if we just retract from the rest of the world and we become this extreme isolationist country. And there is nothing more dangerous than that. You think interventionism, and this is my opinion, I'll let you disagree or agree with wherever you want to go with it, but you want to see, you think that interventionism is dangerous. Wait till you see what it looks like the rest of the world when we have, you know, severe or extreme isolationism, where we retracted, where we ceded ground that we have fought for, both from a military standpoint and or economic interest standpoint. It gets really, really ugly. And then we get into BRICS, and that's another area that I'd like to discuss if you're comfortable with. But explain to America and our viewers why this America First movement, in your opinion, is anything but. Well,
so like you're saying, it's very nuanced, right? So there is the idea that, like, hey, we're going to make sure that America benefits from these agreements that we get. And I think that part of it is healthy, right? Yeah. Bringing growth back to, you know, manufacturing back to America, you know, all these different things. So America First doesn't necessarily mean isolationist. And I think that that's how they've kind of subverted the language, right, on this woke right. Because I don't think Trump ever meant it to be that we would be isolationist. I can't even say that word. But where things have gone, like you're saying, if we pulled out of everything, the world would continue to become globalist. They would continue to follow the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 and the Resilience Development Goals, which are coming out of that. And they would eventually team up and squash America as a power. If we have, if we still have our hands, in the candy jar with everybody else, we can manipulate, right, and make sure that America's policies and, it's like if we've done all this work to democratize the rest of the world, right, why would we completely pull out and let them all become communist or let them all become whatever they're going to become, right, globalist? Because what is eventually going to happen is the system will go on without us. If we don't have a say in how the system is done, and this is where it gets a little tricky and nuanced, for instance, AI, right? I know for sure. So one of the other crazy things I discovered in my research trails is that there's an actual cult at the UN level pushing this oneness worldview. They're actually creating an AI called Kieran AI that basically looks at everything through this oneness lens, globalist lens.
And so Kieran AI.
Kieran AI.
Okay. Not okay. Karen. I'm all up in your business AI. Got it. I want to speak to manager AI.
Exactly. So anyways, this group called the Evolutionary Leaders is very influential in a lot of the global things that are happening, and they kind of operate in plain sight. But that being said, AI, we have to have our hand in how AI is going to be basically formed into the future. Because if AI is left up to all these people, right, it's going to everything that's going to be out there is going to be captured by this mindset. And so we have to have our hand to make sure, and I've actually suggested this to some people as far as like bills going forward, is that we make a law that, hey, if any AI model is found to be pushing this collectivist worldview in America, we just don't use it. It's not allowed. And so we have to have a hand, because AI's, the way that things are going to be is who decides what the rules are. And America has to have a say in that, or it's going to be this collectivist worldview. And so that's what I'm saying, America first, like, hey, we push our worldview, our upholding of people's constitutional rights and freedoms first. And then in the meantime, we cannot sacrifice our ability to operate on the world stage and to be a main player in that world global, kind of hierarchy.
Yeah, and that's my problem with the version of America First that I hear on that side of it is like, no, we just need to leave Russia alone. We just need to leave Iran alone. We just need to leave China alone. And we just need to let them do their thing. When I don't care if you look at, you don't have to look at Russia as an enemy. And I think there's been a lot of missed opportunities in the past and maybe even in the future where we can have a much better relationship with Russia. With that being said, we have to understand that their current trajectory and what they believe is very adversarial and completely conflicts with what makes them like right now where Russia is heading with BRICS and some other economic initiatives and what they're doing in this country. If they get what they want, America is destroyed, or at least damaged to the point to where we are no longer who we are. And there's all kinds of first, second, and third effects that come along with that. And people need to understand that we are in major conflict with what they want and what we want. And the same thing with China and everything else. Like, let's say they're not evil. I would suggest to you that they are in a lot of different ways. But even if you want to take a more friendly approach, these are competitors that right now with their policies are mutually exclusive with the policies and ultimately the goals of the United States. Our success
Mm-hmm.
right now is in conflict with their success because of the path that they've chosen, and quite frankly, some of the paths that we've chosen. And we have to understand that relationship. And it's not that they're necessarily super evil or whatever else. We just have to understand right now, if they win, we lose. And, especially with this BRICS initiative and what they're trying to do, I don't think people really understand what that is and what's actually taking place at the the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Like, these are people trying to figure out, they're meeting there, it's a collective, and trying to figure out the best strategy for the downfall of ultimately the United States. That's what it is from an economic standpoint. And if they're successful with their economics and BRICS, that is far worse than anything that we could most likely ever have with them, short of a nuclear war. If we just had a freaking conventional war with them, the impacts would be most likely less, ultimately, especially the long term. So, like, I think people just need to understand the reality of this. And even going back to like AI, like I'm scared shitless of AI, to be honest with you. Like, I have no idea where that's going to go. And quite frankly, I don't think people that are running AI know where it's going to go. But the cat's out of the bag. Like, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point. And the only way that we are going to be successful, because you better believe China especially is developing AI like nobody's business. I'm sure Russia is too. I just don't think they're as technologically advanced as us or China. But if we don't dominate AI, then somebody else will. And same thing goes with the world. Like, if we don't have global dominance, somebody else will, and it will always be worse than what the United States has done. Like, we have a lot of faults, we've done a lot of things wrong, but at the end of the day, we've done more good with the in relation to the amount of power that we have than any other country on earth.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of things that people, I mean, like you're saying, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's hard because, as you know, as these AI data centers, right now there's a very public fight going on in my state about Project Stratos. Mr. Wonderful wants to build this, what is it, like 40-acre campus on, it's like 16 football fields or something crazy, to build this AI data center. And I think a lot of, it's interesting because there's like some dialectical warfare going on there. You see Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary came out with this whole idea that, there's some groups against the data centers that are being funded by China. And we've lost the narrative of the real grassroots who've been against this whole thing, that literally they got together and they're like, hey, this military industrial development authority basically usurped the local community to say, hey, we're going to decide this for you. The commissioners were strong-armed into accepting it, and the community didn't get a say. So like 500 people showed up at that commissioner's hearing where they did the vote and protested that. And they've turned this now into, hey, this is a Chinese operation to stop the data centers. And I'm like, oh no, actually it's a very real grassroots effort. But it's been muddied on purpose, I feel, by some of these groups that, interestingly enough, they're the people behind the redistricting that created that new district in Utah that the judge threw out the map that the legislators drew and created one that'd be very favorable toward this Democratic Socialist that's now running in that district. They're the same groups that collaborate and cross-post with the immigration coalitions and the Black Lives Matters and the Party for Socialism and Liberation in my state. All these people know this. And so almost like reflexively, because we see these groups that we know are doing bad things, saying, no, we don't want this data center. It's like, I see conservatives who normally would call this out and be like, no, this is not right. The way that they did this is not right. We don't want this in our backyard. It's going to take our resources, et cetera, et cetera. They're reflexively now saying, well, we want the data center. No, we want the data center. And then also it squashes the real opposition and makes it look like it's not genuine when it really is. And so I would say be very careful, because I see this happening in Florida. I see this happening in Texas already. You see groups being called out for being terrible and for being against the data centers. But we can't let the left be able to adopt our talking points and then us change our minds on something that is fundamentally about our liberty and freedom. Because while we need to accelerate AI, I think there is a real danger, and I'm just as scared as you are, Gary, about when you create, it's like, are we creating our own cages for eventually like this digital infrastructure to be able to have digital ID and have them tie all these systems together and have surveillance, et cetera, all the things we've been warning that China's been up to and doing in their country. Is that going to set this up here? And so there is like there's a dichotomy there. And I do agree with you that America, they need to squash our dollar. I mean, everything is traded in American dollars. And so this BRICS is very dangerous. I think that they are trying to actually, and Dugan, who Candace is over there meeting with, really much wants the countries to kind of go back to their corners and be able to, kind of create their cultures on their own. And we have to be able to coexist. And we have to be able to also at the same time say, like, hey, we don't want Russia's policies in America. And I just wanted to mention that one of the guys behind the Color Revolution, actually, this guy named John Steiner, he and very many of the others behind the Color Revolution were the people that were behind the Track 2 diplomacy originally, where they were sending people over there to Russia to be friends and to create this, because they really want to create this whole version of America called Ameris, which combines the process rights of America with the substance rights of Russia.
So Gary's power went out. I apologize.
No.
He'll be right back on. So I do have a question about the data centers.
Yeah.
So what do you say to the people who are like, well, it provides jobs? The way Trump is trying to frame it is that these the people who are investing in these data centers are going to be building like their own power plants, which will lower the cost of energy for the people in that community. So there are some good things that I've heard about it, and then overall bad things. So how do you balance that?
Well, first of all, I think that they've never, it's going to be one of the largest data centers that's ever been built. I don't think they have the data to really say. I think it's hard to say right now that whether or not it will actually bring the power down, and as it expands more, will it then create, it's like we're just talking about with the genie in the bottle. Once it's out, it's like you can't bring it back. And so there needs to be structures put into place that protect the local community and make sure that there are enough resources. I don't think we know really. There is no crystal ball. They can do studies, but what are they going to do studies on when this is one of the largest ones that's ever been built? They don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. I also would argue in a state where we have the heat problem. We were talking about drying up the Great Salt Lake in a state, and this is really where what I call the abundance agenda, because this is what Cox has signed up with, goes off the rails. Because you have again, we're talking about the coalition of the left and the right. He just recently was a keynote speaker at the Abundance 2025 agenda. And this is actually a ploy from the left to make their platform look more palatable to the youth who are like, I can't find a job. I can't do all this. So you're saying, yeah, it's going to bring in jobs, but is it going to bring in jobs for H-1B visa holders, right? Or is it really going to be these kids? And as they give more and more of our jobs to AI, and our kids who go to college don't have jobs, is it going to be the same case with the AI? Like, there's a lot of AI processes that are going to be they can build that right into the code. And so I don't, without things in place to basically secure those things, I think there's a lot of what ifs in regards to this data center. And I think the biggest problem is that we have unelected bodies basically deciding this for the local community. And I think that is the thing that's getting completely overshadowed. They are building these special districts and, things like MITA, where they're saying, oh, it's a military thing, so we're just going to take it and completely override the will of the people. And so this is part of the main problem I feel with this data center, is that they basically did it through a back door, and that was not right. And those people should have the ability to that's why we have a constitutional republic, right? So we can vote in people that can make these decisions, and they're accountable to the people. And this was not a situation where that happened.
Now, I'm still trying to figure out where I stand on data centers and AI. To be honest with you, I think it's equivalent at this point of saying, you know what, we're gonna stick to the horse and buggy, and we're not going to, let car manufacturers come in, and we're not going to go with the car route. Like, in your opinion, what do you think is the right approach with data centers and AI? I think they're a necessity at this point. Now it's just a matter of figuring out the right approach. So what's your take on that?
It's so hard because I'm also not like a Mennonite. I'm like, technology needs to advance. This is how we advance medicine. This is how we advance, technology and a bunch of other things. But it's like, I also feel like there's a big danger if there are not as power shifts, those data centers can be used for various things, and I'm afraid it's going to be used to be taken away. Like, how can we ensure that our rights and freedoms are not going to be infringed upon with these data centers? Because, really, you look at technology now, right? Oh, and I wanted to bring up a point too about the resources really quick, is that
Sure.
in the same breath that Governor Cox is like, let's bring this data center in and let's, use all this water and energy, all of a sudden everyone's on board with using water and energy, even the environmentalists on the left who are part of this abundance agenda. And the same breath, he's saying, let's put smart meters on local people's homes to monitor your water and electricity usage and send you a letter in the mail every month if you use too much, you're at a certain percentage in your community. You know what I mean? They're demonizing people's own usage of these resources while diverting those to kind of globalist resources, because we're not being ensured that these resources are going to be used for the local community. And so I'm just saying that there's a misstep there.
They're forcing us to use these toilets that are like flush with the equivalent of an eyedropper, and you got to do it 47 times. While they're using, and that's the other thing too. It's like, I remember, I think it was Ann Coulter, like back in the early 2000s, wrote a book. I forgot what it was called, but she talked about this. She talked about how all of these different leftist cities and states were pushing all these water restrictions on everybody, when forcing us to have these shower heads that use 10% of the water, the toilets that don't flush, and like residential water usage was like 5% of the water usage. Like 95% of it is either industrial or agricultural. And it like if we save 10% of our water on the residential side, it really doesn't even compare to a drop in the bucket of what actually is being used. So it is always funny to see this dichotomy that we have there. And then you kind of get into just some freedom issues when it comes to, like, there's going to be corporations that are obviously going to implementing this, and are we going to have them? Is that going to be on the ballot? Like, are we going to start regulating corporations to the point where it's like, no, you can't buy that land? And I know we do that to some extent, but it does get complicated. And I think one of the most complicated discussions that we've had in a long time comes to AI and these data centers. I think if we're not aggressive with it, we will fall behind. But at the same time, there does need to be a balance struck, and I don't think we're even close to getting there yet.
No, and like you said, with the technology, it's you look at the internet, you look at social media. Have our freedoms been protected at all? Have they have they used it to get more information about, like, where were the controls in place? And they've never been. Even when I'm pretty sure they probably promised people at the beginning that, oh yeah, we're going to protect your data and you're going to be able to opt in. But it's like, I look at, you look at your phone, when you turn on your Apple phone, and you have to agree to the terms of service or you're not going to be able to use your phone. Do you click no? You don't. And do you read the whole entire thing? No, you don't. And so pretty soon it's going to be an idea where,
are there sections that you can opt out of?
What'd you say?
I was saying, are there sections in that you can?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was like, no, I don't like this section.
You either get all of this,
So
4 pages
there's
of
never been protection.
freedom and privacy away, or you don't get to call anybody. That's your choices.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's not a choice. That's I think that eventually, unfortunately, and it's like, do the people in China now? Well, they have to use QR codes, to scan their social credit score to get in, to get a vending machine. How do you opt out of that once it's in place? Yeah. I don't get food at the store if I don't, So something like, are we building our prison is my question with AI. And then especially knowing that, and I'm sure your viewers don't know about this because it's kind of obscure, but there is a move by the UN 100 and AI World Society to create this system called Game B, where, and this is where we see this left-right convergence happen, right? Because the left has always been about limits to growth, and the right's been always about growth. So now how are we going to make it so that everybody's taken care of, right? We still have a sort of democratic system. So what I think they're going to do, and they've said this through Game B, is that they're going to have AI be the mediator of this resource-based economy that they want to put into place. And this resource-based economy will basically be able to have everything be tokenized. Everything has a value. Everything has a data set, right? And it's an exchange, right, of resources. And so I have a need over here. I can fill this need over here. And so those things match up. The problem is that AI is going to decide this according to, and it depends on who gets to train the AI. And that's why I think the US should be involved in this race, sort of, right? But if people are allowed to train this AI according to equity, and they are allowed to put in this global kind of tokenized resource-based economy, where, okay, now we're not saying limits to growth, we can grow, but yeah, and now we can take local resources over here and say, hey, these should be redirected to Africa because those people need it more, And so this is the worry with Game B, is that they already have a system in place. And that cult that I was just telling you about, the evolutionary leaders, the leader of that cult, Barbara Marx Hubbard, was working with a group at the UN called NOAA MAP or S7 to actually build this resource-based economy out technologically. And now it started with just like, hey, I have a need for a software developer over here. And then this person says, oh, I'm a software developer, I can help you. And then they've been able to expand it even more. And so they're already building the technology through Web3 and blockchain to have this resource-based economy. And unfortunately, the direction I see it going is this AI with equity, resource distribution, which is basically global communism. And that's my worry, is that that's the direction that it'll go. And I don't know what we can do to stop it other than continue to say no to these policies and build structures around it to ensure that we still have our freedom and liberty.
Yeah, what we need is a big global EMP. That's what we need. We need to go back to campfires. That's what really needs to happen. Jen pulled up a
yeah, I don't know. I mean, technology is a blessing and a curse.
It really is. Jen pulled up this clip talking about the Koch brothers. Go ahead, Jen.
So I concluded what you concluded, which is, I'm not going to keep doing this work if I can't solve the money problem. So several months ago, I started organizing a meeting, which is now happening in November. And I'm trying to figure out how to talk about it so that I'm not violating conflict. I think I'll just keep it vague. There's a meeting happening in November on the East Coast to which the representatives of the Soros family are invited and coming. Representatives of the Koch family are invited and coming. And 20 other funders are coming who are on the left and right and who all are appalled at what's happening with their money and what's happening in the country. So we're going to sit them down for 2.5 days at a very prestigious estate of a very wealthy family that will remain nameless. And they're going to sit down and we're going to say to them, how do you feel about how your money is working? How do you feel about the way your millions are being spent? And I guarantee you, the Kochs are not very happy with Donald Trump. And the folks on the left are not very happy with what's happening on the progressive side. And they're going to basically start looking at each other and saying, is there some other way we can use our funds? My hope is that after that meeting, in the middle of November, I could come back here to the library and say, even the people that we're talking about, that we're saying are the problem, even they are starting to say we've got to do something about it. Because I agree with you that until those people with the millions and billions until they start thinking a little differently. And they literally felt that they could use their money to get their way. What they're finding out is that their money's not getting their way. They're not getting what they want. And that's the key. So I conclude.
Yeah, sounds a lot like, hey, I'm not able to buy politicians the way that I want to, and so we gotta team up with the left and the right to get these initiatives pushed, these global initiatives pushed.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about BRICS and talk about that initiative and kind of talk about what's happening in St. Petersburg. And because I was on a space even yesterday and we started talking about this, and I realized that 90+% of America don't realize that, like, again, there's nuance. Like, you know, when we go back to the when Trump was first elected, we had this thing being pushed where Trump was essentially trying to build some diplomatic relationships, and I think rightfully so, with Russia. And now all of a sudden Russia is, you know, Trump is Russia's puppet. You know, we had the Steele dossier, we had the Russia collusion hoax. It was Russia, 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 Russia. And now we actually have people that are genuinely colluding with Russia and China. And it's like, oh, Russia, like, no. That doesn't quite hit the same when we have people actually in Russia working with people that want to see the downfall of America, whether we're talking about Alexander Dugin, whether we're talking about this circle of influence that Russia, and ultimately I think China is just better at hiding it. I think they're much more subversive, and I think they're much more covert in their operations and how they influence people. I think Russia's a little bit more forward-facing with that, and to me, it's pretty obvious. And the other thing too, you know, when we talk about pluralism and we talk about multipolarism, you know, it's like, yeah, we have Russia and China and Iran and a few other countries, Brazil, and, you know, they are working for the downfall of America, but because they don't like that America is able to throw their military and economic weight around the world. Like they want a de-dollarization. But ultimately, once that takes place, what people don't realize is, like, China still wants to dominate the world, and all they're going to do is now once the U.S. is defeated or diminished, now Russia and China are going to be going after each other. Like, all of these countries want dominance, but they're just, you know, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's the approach that they're taking with it. Talk a little bit about BRICS. Talk a little bit about the de-dollarization and what that really means for us in the United States, and what a real threat that is coming from Russia, China, Iran, and Brazil.
It's exactly what you just said. I mean, America is able, because our dollar is used for so many of the standards of how goods and services are traded around the world. It really keeps our dollar strong and able to kind of throw its weight around economically and militarily. So if these nations do in fact devalue the dollar, come up with their own currency, it'll be bad news for America. And we will not be seen as the superpower. We will not be able to uphold democracy and our version of constitutional democracy, as far as, you know, valuing people's rights and freedoms, and not, you know, having individualism and pushing back against collectivism the way that we are now.
Yeah, and ultimately, you know, that's I kind of think good from an abstract point of view to kind of discuss. But what people need to realize, like, folks, if you think like it's bad when gas is $5 a gallon, if something like BRICS gets put into place, you're talking about $20 gas. You're talking about abject poverty around the United States. You are talking about goods and services going through the roof. You're talking about inflation like you've never seen before. You're talking about the ability of all of these countries to, you know, put different restrictions on the United States like we have been doing around the world, right? Like, and that's how we actually attack people non-militarily. That's what we've done to Iran. That's what we've done to China at some points, and even Russia. Like, I don't think, like, you know, when people sit there and say, oh, you know, it's just like Candace Owens or whoever else, whether it's Tucker working with Qatar, whether it's all of these things that we see taking place, and it's like, oh, this could be good. Like there is nothing good that comes out of this unless you're already super wealthy and unless you're already super rich, unless you're already part of the collaborators that are working with China and Russia. Like you don't, like you and your kids and your grandkids will be living in what is the equivalent of a third world country. We will not have control of our own country. We will not have the economic might and power that we have. We definitely won't have the military might that we have. Like, I don't think people understand the real world effects of what some of these people are playing with. And it is extremely dangerous and extremely detrimental to our country. And it's like, well, you know, it's like, oh, we can just be friends with these people. It's like, no, we can build diplomatic relations with these people, but it has to be done smart. And what it can't be is allowing them to remove the dollar as the standard for currency in the world. Like that can't happen unless you want the worst for your nation, because that's what's going to take place.
Right, you're so right. I mean, they can impose embargoes. They could, I mean, just the inflationary effects of and the downfall of what would happen if America is not the standard, the gold standard around the world is going to be a problem, especially considering the trillions of dollars in debt that we are in. And that's kind of how, you know, obviously China throws its weight around, right? They get countries in debt to them. And then they can implement their agendas in those countries. And so what would happen if that happens in the US?
Yeah, you know, it's we're like, I don't know, like I think again, a lot of this stuff gets talked about at this esoteric level, in like the real world effects of it don't get discussed, so people don't understand because they're not sitting around talking about, you know, economic policies and foreign affairs and all the other things. And all we're worried about is the next election. Whereas both the Democrats and definitely the Chinese, the Russians, like they are playing the long game. And we need to be paying attention to what's happening right here in front of our face, or we're stuck only paying attention to what's right here in front of our face. And it's an intentional distraction as well.
And I think too, it's because America's enjoyed prosperity for so long, right? I mean, really, our grandparents were the last people, right, to experience the Depression and the downfall effects of that. You know, the rationing that happened during World War II. Our generation really hasn't. I mean, and that's why I think a lot of, I don't know how old you are, Gary, but I'm going to be 47 this year, and so I'm a Gen Xer, and you know, we were the generation too that maybe grew up half not technology, half with technology. And so we can see things kind of on a broader scale, and we still have our stories of our grandparents of what it was like to grow up during the Depression. But I think, you know, most people just want to live their lives and take their kids to soccer, and, you know, not to think about this stuff. But unfortunately, you know, I'm sure a lot of those people back in the day, I mean, before, you know, the stock market crash, they were just doing the same thing, and in an instant their lives changed. And I just think that we need to start thinking about these things and start thinking about the future so that we can prepare ourselves and our family for what might be coming. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but also because you know, it's important on the world stage, and if America falls, we're the last stop for freedom.
Yeah, tyranny is always one generation away, and economic demise is always one generation away if we're not paying attention. Let's take some questions. And I'm curious how Lisa feels about Steve Hilton, because I have my suspicions.
I don't know much about Steve Hilton. I know he had one of my friends on to talk about, she's been covering comprehensive sexuality education and whole child stuff, that basically they're trying to medicalize the schools so that they can take the rights away from parents to have medical decisions for their children. And he had her on. So, I mean, at least that's a positive for him in my eyes. But I don't really know much about him other than that. So I don't have an opinion, unfortunately.
Yeah, me neither. Jen just confirmed we have Dr. Gadsad book July 3rd, folks. That's a big one.
Ooh.
I'm excited.
That's
My daughter was brainwashed in school. I thought she was going to a no bullying group after school when it was an LGBTQ indoctrination camp. Isn't that wild? It's so funny how they intentionally market, name, and push these things with and it's so intentionally deceptive, but they do it, whether they're talking about, Congress does it with the names of bills too. But it is wild to see how intentionally deceptive our schools are, especially, and trying to hide things from parents.
It's heartbreaking, honestly, because I know parents who have gone through it with their own kids and just the mental health struggles they have. I mean, so much of this is social. This push for, obviously, it's almost like you could time it, right? And that's one of the biggest threads I had go viral when I was posting on social media was this one where this woman was talking about how Biden took her, and she was a part of a company called Ernst & Young, took her and 13 other companies who were had this coalition called the Partnership for LGBTQIA Equality backstage at Davos, and said, you companies can do what we government cannot, by pushing this LGBTQ stuff. And what did we see happen? We saw all of the brands, right? All of a sudden you had Target pushing this in the stores. So it wasn't just this grassroots, all of a sudden people are identifying as trans, right? Because it's normal. No, it wasn't normal and or natural. It was being pushed from an agenda from on high. And all of these people were normalizing this in our culture. And so sad that I'm sorry for your kid, being brainwashed in school. It's an unfortunate thing. And I think the best defense against that is being in communication with your kids. I keep telling everybody, have dinner with your kids every night. You can't hide them from this stuff. They got to go to school. They got to know how to intellectually think about this stuff when it's presented to them. But you can have conversations around the dinner table and say, hey, what's happening at school? How are you feeling about this push that everyone needs to be trans? Talk about it on a rational level with your kid if they're old enough. And that's the kinds of stuff that kind of insulates them against this. Be close as a family. Yeah.
If you're not indoctrinating your kids, and you should be, if you're not doing it, somebody else is. And I think that's important to make sure that you're what they're being exposed to if they're in public school. And if you can, like my oldest, because like the middle schools here are great and the elementary school is great, but the high school not so much. So my oldest is he's homeschooling, and it's just a much better option if that's practical for you and you can afford to do that, or whatever you got going on there. And public school systems are an indoctrination factory, and it's like, as a parent, have your kid 8 hours plus a day. Like you can't compete with that. You can't. They want everyone to be a degenerate like themselves. They brainwash the kids in public schools. Absolutely. Owens has never been what she represented herself as. She's just an opportunist. Eventually, she will burn enough bridges and fade away. I would say that.
I believe that's true.
See, my concern is that we're underestimating her. I think a lot of people thought after USA she would do that. I think right after she left PragerU, they thought that was going to happen. After the Daily Wire, for sure, they thought that was going to happen. I think she's a problem, but I think she's a real tenacious problem. And she is an opportunist, and she will move from thing to thing to thing that she thinks that she can push. So I hope you're right. I hope you're both right. I'd be careful about underestimating her and other people like her. They want us to look like Paris right now.
I also think that's true, Gary.
Yeah.
Right. And what happened at the Olympics in Paris? I want to say too that the Olympics, there was, people saw the Olympics for what it was this last time around. They were like, oh, okay. And interestingly enough, Utah has the Olympics. They came here in 2002, completely changed our culture here in Utah. I moved here in 2011 after the fact, and I was told, like, hey, literally, like, they created surveillance like crazy, and we have it coming again in 2034. So it's unfortunate, but the Olympics is being used just like it has been in Paris and other places to completely change those countries. And also the immigration piece, right? We've talked about this, Gary. It's the purpose is to change the culture. It is to force out. I mean, in that way, the America First crowd is sort of right. This replacement theory is true. like, hey, we're trying to get people in here who are going to have more collectivist values than you Western folks.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And this is rhetorical because we could go like, I don't know what's happening in Utah. Like when I went to Utah to UVU, I was shocked by, again, just like it's the dichotomy of like, clearly this is a very Mormon religious place, but then I see like all the LGBTQ stuff, and I see these kids walking around on the college campus in like furry attire. I'm like, what is going on here? And you don't have to answer. I'm sure that's a rabbit hole. Do 3 more podcasts on of in itself, and then like Governor Cox and everything that's going on, like it's wild to watch that. Lisa Logan, you are truly amazing, and I couldn't agree more. Oh,
thank you.
America first, but not America only. Yeah, we not only have a moral responsibility to the rest of the world by being the best. The real world is more complex in its connections. It is. Hilarious. The woke right keeps telling us America first are buying property in Doha, Qatar, and going to speak in Russia. Well
Cannot
said.
be truer.
Like, couldn't have summarized that better. That was, thank you, Cassette. Great. The woke right turned America first into America only isolationists. It's not an America first when they talk about it. That's the problem. It's what they may say that, but the policies that they're pushing forward is guaranteeing our demise.
Yeah. The
devil is a great deceiver, and his most powerful weapon is weaponizing, inverting language. It's how the devil insults the creator by perverting, destroying truth, purity. That is propaganda at its core. Right? That is information operations at its core. Using pieces of truth to deceive people to have them buy into a lie.
Right.
Claremore, Oklahoma City Council entered into an NDA and negotiated to have the data center built in Claremore. There are no way the data centers will build their own power plants. Way too much government regs for that to happen. I think we're going to see. Well, look, I've been researching this a lot lately, and maybe one day we'll do a podcast on this. Like the fact that we've gotten away from nuclear power, and there was a lot of reasons for that. None of them good, by the way, in my opinion. Nuclear power is one of those things that is easy to fearmonger. But when you really look into the facts of it, how much cleaner it is, how much more efficient it is, I think this was getting rid of nuclear power was the opportunity to have safe, abundant energy. And I think there was a movement that didn't want that. We've kind of, I don't know, just sabotaged ourselves from that. I hope that we do move to more nuclear. And I think we're going to end up, just out of necessity, we're going to see some little micro nuclear power plants that are powering data centers. I think that's going to have to happen. And hopefully we'll start integrating more nuclear power plants in the United States. I think even the environmentalists are somewhat waking up to this. We'll see.
Yeah.
We need.
I'm also going to say, just as a devil's advocate here, it's not just nuclear. They're doing geothermal, they're doing hydrogen, and I think that we've got to be careful there because you look at a place like Utah, for instance, right? They're all of a sudden doing a lot of geothermal stuff, and oh gosh, we're all of a sudden starting to have these earthquakes. We're on fault lines here, and so I think that there are ways to do clean energy even with the fossil fuels now. And I think so. It's like, yeah, we need to have an all and everything approach, but at the same time, like we have to make sure we're preserving. I think it's like we can't go like the environmentalists took it in a crazy direction. We can't flip it all the way over, right? There is some downward effects. Like I said, the Great Salt Lake is drying up, mostly because they're mining lithium out of it. And this whole resource-based agenda is about taking local resources from the community. So I want to make sure that there's that balance there, right? Like, okay, yeah, energy, let's grow, let's produce, let's bring American technology and manufacturing back here. But we have to be careful that we don't go the opposite direction, since the left is now easing up on their environmental restrictions and not thinking about kind of like the secondary and downturn effects of some of these types of energy.
Sure. No, I agree. We need data centers, period, for any tech going forward to deal with AI and its increased computing requirements over current tech. I mean, I think that's just a reality that we have to come to grips with. I just read that some hacked people's Instagram accounts by asking AI for the password and provided it. Yeah, there's a lot of people, a lot of ways that people have been manipulating AI where there wasn't safeguards built into it yet. That's going to continue to expand. But AI is scary. Like we're building our replacement to some extent. We're building our overlords potentially, and that gets next thing you know, Terminator is now a documentary.
Yeah, Hunger Games. Yeah. Not a good thing.
Exactly. Lisa here in Utah, we can't accommodate the people moving in, let alone a data center water usage. Not against AI. Feel blindsided and don't trust our lovely Governor Cox. Governor Cox.
Thanks a lot. I don't trust him either. He's a Republican in name only. We had all this election craziness going on with the signatures. There's a guy who just wrote a book called Sig Gate, talks about it. There is a reason why Cox is there. And Cox, again, I just want to say that his Disagree Better initiative has been partnering with the Dignity Index, which came out of that Biden administration thing, that dignity.us now directs there. And it's all about censoring our speech. So I don't trust Cox, who talks out of two sides of his mouth in regards to, it's funny, these people, they got the AI data center here. There's been massive pushback. And all of a sudden you have the same people who are appointed by Governor Cox, which you didn't know he appointed 5 of the 8 members that put this data center in place behind the public's back. Now saying, there's people from that same board now writing letters to Kevin O'Leary saying, hey, we want you to reduce it by 75%. And Cox is doing executive orders that supposedly, make sure the public's protected when we make decisions like this. It's like these people, it's funny. It's like a lot of theater. They're trying to regulate themselves after, they've been caught red-handed, not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so, I don't know. I don't trust him one bit either. So we're on board.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. I went to, in special operations, we had there was like a disproportionate amount of representation of Mormons in special operations. Like there was, so I became a friend with a lot of LDS and loved them. Was close friends with a lot of people. And they've always been extremely conservative. Like, why do we see so many LDS politicians and other folks that are like buying into this leftist globalist thing? It seems so contradictory to who they are as a people and to their religious principles.
I'd say it's the leadership. Obviously I live in Utah. I'm not LDS at all. But I have a lot of LDS friends, lived here since 2011. And I feel like there's a dichotomy, right? They're taught by their religious documents to value freedom, to value all that kind of stuff. And then the leadership, because I think they send missionaries all across the world, they're very much in touch with the United Nations. And that's something I think too that people didn't understand about UVU is like, it's literally a United Nations school. Like I've gone to meetings there where I've literally heard the General Assembly President of the UN say, we're going to create a new world order. When there's a new world order in the making, like I'm literally quoting him, there's going to be casualties. Like, what? Like, so the church is very much aligned with the United Nations and relies on their help. I think because, and like you said, there's a lot of special operations folks. They send their kids on missionaries. They oftentimes speak a different language. They're very politically involved, but that also makes them huge candidates for the deep state. and the CIA and a lot of these intelligence agencies. So it's hard. They're told not to question what their leadership is doing. And then I see the leadership of the church bringing in like a global diversity director, and you're like, wait, like that's, so I think it's hard for the members to question because they're told not to. Yet at the same time, there's a lot of people whose eyes are very much wide open as to what their leadership is doing. And it's hard for them it's like trying to hold those two warring things in their mind. It's been very difficult for them to call it out at the level that they really should be.
What's their justification for what appears to me a fairly strong support for LGBTQ and trans ideology?
A lot of like I said, the changes in leadership. They brought in a woman named Sharon Eubanks who literally platformed a trans person on stage. It used to be if someone, and I don't agree with this personally, I do think that people are sometimes it's just like how some people are born with 6 fingers, like on one hand. I think there are people that are born that are attracted to the opposite sex for whatever reason. Maybe something goes wrong in utero. I don't even know, right? But it's not the norm, and it doesn't support population growth. So they used to, unfortunately, in their church, put those people through like programs that would change their mind about being homosexual. And I don't know if I agree with that, but I think they almost went the other direction. And we were just talking about the toxic empathy or suicidal empathy. All of a sudden now with the culture changing within their church, and a lot more people identifying, they're now faced with the problem of how do we deal with these folks? They don't kind of fit into our model. We want to be loving and embrace these people. How do we do that in a way that still preserves our belief that men are men and women are women, and that the best way to further our society is to have nuclear families raising children. So it's a very complicated thing, and I can see that the church is struggling to figure out how do we handle this now that there's this influx, because our culture has been changed so much, of people identifying this way.
Fair enough. Yeah, nuclear families, nuclear energy. It's the way America needs to move forward. Don't know. China has a problem with lying about its accomplishments and putting a facade on anything it does that goes bad. Lots of failed bridges, trains, and buildings. Yeah, they do. But look, let's not look. They are the production capital of the world right now for a reason. They can get people to do anything. They basically have slave labor. They have no real regulations. They're a communist, dictatorial, authoritarian society. So they can put resources into projects and on top of that, they're constantly stealing our IP. So their rate of technological advancement far exceeds ours for a lot of the reasons that they're not equal to us. They're still decades behind us, but they are advancing faster than we did. And we are. So I think, and I don't even know decades. I think they're probably like 5-10 years behind us, and they could be less than that. But anyways, it's something that we need to pay attention to. They definitely have a lot of economic and social problems as well. They have a real population issue. Their birth rates are extremely low. I don't know. I don't want them to succeed, not because I hate them, but because I love America, and right now we're at odds with them. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
A community near me is installing flock cameras. People are losing their minds. They don't really have an opinion, but all these people freaking out about it are happily posting from their phones. Yeah, like those cameras, good, bad, or indifferent. I don't like a surveillance state either, but they're also in public, and you really can't. I mean, they're filming in public. I don't know. Again, the only thing that answers this, global EMP. We need a real big sun flare and just back to woodland sticks and living in caves. Gary, tell Lisa to just tell what clips to pull, and I will send them to Jen. Absolutely.
A little late. It's fine. I love SK though. Love you, SK.
I love SK Double Dub. I just like saying her name too, and I love when she comes on. Everything she's talking about in fulfillment of preparation of Mark of the Beast, 7-year tribulation period. I'm amazed but not surprised. Look, If you understand Revelation and then you understand our societal and civilization trajectory, it's really hard to argue that we are fulfilling prophecy. That's my religious take on it.
I know you have comments to get through. I kind of wanted to end on a positive note. If I could read something that really spoke to me last night.
Yep.
If you want to get through a couple more comments, or.
Oh yeah, I'm going to give you the last word, and we'll Word of God says to pray for our leaders. What are you praying? They obey, if not Christ and His commandments. Christian nationalism is the only way. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you mean by Christian nationalism. I'll say that. Keep doing what you're doing, Gary and Lisa. Gary, you're an amazing, fair man. Have a great day. And aloha, chat, Jen, mods. Until the next time, stay armed, stay ready, away from shady people. Air Jeff, I love you very much.
Thanks, Air Jeff.
Trust neither side. Candace Tucker, Islam apologist. Trump MAGA, big pharma sorcery. Chemtrail spraying, 16th Amendment, usury theft, apologist, repent in Jesus' name. None of you are righteous. I agree with everything in that last part of that, for sure. That last sentence, I completely agree with that. I think there's
and I want to say real quick before you go on to the next comment is that that's one thing that, Jenica, Data Republican, just did a really good 2 articles about what she called the 4th founding. And that's what the end goal of a lot of these people are doing. I think they have something planned for July 4th of this year, basically to subvert the 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment to include people who are not born here as American citizens. So it's funny that the Supreme Court kind of around that time is going to be deciding birthright citizenship.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, look, I get offended at the false comparison of the Trump and everybody else, and the Trump administration, or even Republicans versus Democrats. I don't again, there is that horseshoe theory on extreme sides of that. There's no doubt about that. There are right-wing globalists, but that's not what the Trump MAGA movement isn't. And we know that because, as we've kind of highlighted throughout this, there's a reason that since 2016, Trump has been under attack nationally and internationally. Like, there has been constant operations that have been pushed against him, psychological operations, information operations, disinformation operations, to take him down. And legal, we've seen the DOJ weaponized against it. Like, there's a desperation by the global community and people within the United States to take Trump down. And they fooled a bunch of people saying, oh no, this is the same thing. And it's not. This, if anything, in my opinion, and I've researched this, and there's lots to criticize Trump about. In my opinion, it is Trump in the MAGA movement that is actually pro-American, is actually America first, and there's everything else. And there's lots of things to criticize and lots of things that are just not going to be correct, right? When it comes to the Trump administration or a government in general, lots of problems there that we can dissect. But the alternative that these other people are offering is the absolute destruction of this country. That's the way that I feel about this. And when we start comparing those two, I think it indicates that some of these disinformation operations have been successful. That's how I see that.
Yeah, and I think just as you've highlighted, and I appreciate you doing it, in your shows, Gary, is that there has been infiltration. So don't always think just because you see a voice in the MAGA or America First movement pushing something, you have to use discernment and say, is that person trying to lead me astray? Is that person trying to muddy the water in what it means to be America First? And I think that we got to pay attention to those things. And I know what we've talked about is incredibly dark today, right? All this, the machines are going to take over the world and all of these things. Color revolution's happening in our country. And I found something last night that Colonel Tanner Watkins, who's been kind of talking about Project Gladio and how a lot of these groups have been unfortunately used to infiltrate our government and these various institutions. But it'll bring us full circle because we started talking about COVID, right? This guy named Kenny Carmody, he says, every obedience experiment in history had the same overlooked finding. Not everyone complied. In Milgram's lab, 35% refused to deliver the final shock. In Ash's line experiments, 25% never conformed, not once across any trial. In Zimbardo's prison, at least one guard refused to dehumanize. One prisoner demanded a lawyer instead of a doctor and broke the psychological frame entirely. We spent decades studying the ones who obeyed. We barely asked what made the others different. That question matters more now than it ever has. The resistors in the COVID era were not difficult to find. Physicians who filed exemptions and lost their licenses, nurses who walked away from careers rather than mandate patients into decisions they hadn't genuinely chosen, scientists who published contrary data knowing what it would cost them, parents who stood alone at school board meetings, ordinary people who simply said quietly, without drama, no. What made them different? Research consistently defines a cluster of factors, not personality traits you either have or don't, situational and cognitive patterns that can't be cultivated. First, prior reflection on authority. The resistors had originally thought before the crisis about the limits of institutional trust. They weren't cynics. They weren't people who had already asked the question, under what conditions would I refuse, before anyone was asking them to comply. Second, a concrete reference point outside the consensus, a value, principle, and oath, a relationship that existed independently of the institutional structure demanding compliance, something the system couldn't reach. Third, at least one other person. Milgram found that a single dissenting Confederate reduced compliance dramatically. Fourth, the willingness to tolerate social pain, not immunity to it, tolerance to it. They felt the pressure, they felt the exclusion, they chose the discomfort of integrity over the comfort of belonging. None of this is innate, all of it is learnable. The most important thing Milgram, Ash, and Zimbardo taught us is not how fragile conscience is that conscience can hold if you've trained it, named its limits, and found even one other person willing to hold theirs besides you. Build that now, because that experiment is always running, always. Until then, stay humble, and I would add, stay human.
Love it. I love it. And it's a great example. Be this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Be that guy. Willing to stand
Be
up
that
for the
guy.
truth.
Mm-hmm.
Willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's not popular, even when it's not profitable. A wise man once said, the truth isn't always popular, but it's always worth it. His name is Charlie Kirk. A couple other super chats, and then we will close this down. Christian nationalism will have its counterfeits, but true Christianity holds corruption accountable. The fruit of our labor does not belong to Caesar. I want to say it was Ben Shapiro, it might have been somebody else, recently said, the problem is that, it might have, no matter of fact, I think it was Charlie Kirk as well, a video I was watching recently. He said, we have a Christian, we built this nation on a Christian system. And the problem is now we've turned into the secular nation still working under a Judeo-Christian system. And that's the conflict that we're having with this. And there's plenty of founders quotes that back that up. But, that's what we're running into. And that's one of probably the most important message that I have for this channel. Like you need to find a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that will guide you. And I can tell you, I really woke up to that after the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I've shared that with some of you on this channel before. I was talking about all these things. I was playing videos for my kids right after this, and we were all kind of caught up in this. And my son, after one of those videos, he was 11 years old, and we had not been going to church for a while. He said, Dad, I really want to get baptized. And I realized how much I had been failing my family as the spiritual leader of our family. And anyways, that's what's really important at the end of the day. This is all of this stuff is going to come and go, but eternity is eternal. So, get right with God, get a relationship with God, find a good church. Christian nationalism, I hate that one. So long as those who say they are Jews and Islam respect who's in charge, Jesus Christ, they are welcome in America, but they must make a declaration not to try to usurp authority over the king and his law, and over our Constitution, which again is at the end of the day is built on Judeo-Christian principles, without a doubt. Lisa, number one, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate this. I feel like we barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about. I'd love to have you on again soon. Leave the viewers with a final word for everybody out there.
Well, if you want to find my work, I've written a lot of articles and threads. I would check out my profile at X at I am Lisa Logan. I have a pinned post there that basically explains, pulls together much of my work I'd done over the last 4 or 5 years before I stopped posting. I have a Substack called lisalogan.substack.com, and I have a YouTube channel called Parents of Patriots, where I've done longer form videos about some of the subjects I cover. So, like I said, I would urge everyone to stay human. All of this stuff, like Gary just said, is dressing. The core meat and potatoes of your life is your family. It's your relationship with your creator, whatever that looks like for you. But really all of this is just noise, and focus on the things that matter, because at the end of the day, all that other stuff will go away. All that other stuff will continue to change and continue to frustrate you, but continue to stay human and true to who you are.
Yeah, and down in the description below, folks, are at least all the links to Lisa's different social medias. Make sure you go follow her. Make sure you support her work. And we will definitely be having her on again soon. And you know what, Lisa, we need to do some spaces. I would love to do that too. Get some other people involved if you're ever in and holding some X spaces. That's something I want to do more of on a regular basis. So I'd love to have you as a co-host or host, or I'll just sit there and listen. I'm fine with that. I think I can listen to you all day. We are going to be having, we're in the process of getting Data Republic on, so that'll be another great show as well. But we also, tonight, folks, at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to be doing a show, and we will have Lisa Knows on, so make sure you tune back in here in a couple of hours. But Lisa, thank you so much for what you're doing. Continue speaking truth. I know it's not always easy, and this is not always a fun space to be in, but your voice is needed. And if there's anything that we can ever do to help you in any way, I will be sharing your content. But you name it, reach out to us. We'd love to do whatever we can. Continue to help you out.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to be on your show today, Gary. Thanks so much.
No, the pleasure's all ours. Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Lisa, you don't go away. Don't go away. But for everybody else, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Share this content. Share the content. Get the message out there. But until next time, stay armed. Stay ready. We'll talk to you.